What kind of God is Yahweh? And remember, that is the question that Exodus is all about. It's the big thing on God's agenda. Exodus introduces us to Yahweh. And at the first half of the book, chapters 1 to 18, we showed us his uniqueness. God declared his name to be, I am who I am. We saw his unparalleled power to save and to judge. And we saw in Jethro's words that Yahweh is greater than all gods. Yahweh is a God whose side you really want to be on. It's kind of hero, in fact, that you would want to marry. Strong and yet kind and good. And that's exactly where part 2 of the book, chapters 19 to 40, takes us. God makes a marriage-like covenant with Israel. And remember, he'd said all along that was the goal of saving Israel. As early as chapter 6, God said this, "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who's brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians." God saved Israel for a relationship. In relationship terms, you could think of that as a marriage proposal. And so when we get to chapter 19, now that Israel are safely out of Egypt, we should hear wedding bells ringing, because the big day has arrived. And God is about to enter into a covenant relationship with Israel. Hopefully you've seen in your groups how these passages in chapters 19 to 40 follow the pattern of a wedding ceremony and the early days of marriage. But you might have been wondering, as you went through, is this whole marriage metaphor that we've been talking about really that helpful? Are we in danger of reading in a framework to the text that isn't actually there? That is a good question that one or two of you've asked me, in fact. And the reason that I'm really persuaded we should think about these chapters in terms of a marriage is because it seems to me that is how God himself interprets this covenant in the prophets. So here's just one verse which demonstrates that from Jeremiah chapter 31. Here is God explaining how Israel broke this covenant. This is what he says: "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord." Do you see that? That is how God understands what this covenant meant for Israel. It made him their husband. So marriage isn't just a kind of helpful metaphor that we've come up with to try and illustrate these chapters. Actually, it is the way that God wanted Israel to think about the relationship with him they were committing to. And here's why I think that is really exciting for us. Because it helps us to see how committed God is to having the deepest, most intimate relationship imaginable with his people. This is how much he loves us, how much he wants to live with us. It means that when we get that vision in Revelation 21 of a wedding day, of Jesus as the bridegroom and the church as his bride, that isn't a kind of strange and radically new idea that we're only given a glimpse of right at the end of the Bible. No, God declares his intention to be married to those whom he's saved actually as early as the second book of the Bible. And this depth of relationship is the goal from the beginning. And the rest of the Bible story is about how God gets us there. So actually, ever since Genesis 3, we've been wondering if humanity could actually get back into the relationship with God they had in the Garden of Eden. And hopefully you saw in your group something of how the instructions about the tabernacle reflected lots of the details about Eden. It was like a mini Eden being set up in the midst of Israel. Because while the tabernacle was a picture of God bringing people back into relationship with him, we now enjoy the beginnings of that reality through Jesus. Do you remember how those verses from John's Gospel talked about how he has come and made his home within us by his Spirit? Or how Paul says in Ephesians that we're being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. This construction project that will be completed on the day when the Lord meets his bride and we begin life with him in our eternal home. God is building a permanent home for himself out of his church. He wants us to live with him forever as his bride. I think that is the great goal and purpose of our lives. And so we're going to pause there and think a little bit more about what that means together in our groups.